the Wuhan people knew about the human-to-human transmission in December. I guarantee that Xi Jinping knew about it back then, and we know for a fact that the WHO knew on the 7th of January. So, yes, this is entirely the Chinese Communist Party. That whether it actually was released on purpose, that I can't tell you. But what I can tell you is a pandemic was created by the Chinese Communist Party for letting those 5 million people leave Wuhan to the four corners of the earth.
Gordon, China's actions, suspected and confirmed, are actions of an enemy, are they not?
Well, they certainly are. I mean, People's Daily, which is the most authoritative publication in China, in May 2019 carried a landmark editorial that declared a quote-unquote people's war on us. And that is a phrase which has great resonance in Communist Party history. So we know how they treat us. And by the way, in 2023, PLA Daily, which is the main propaganda organ of the Chinese military, actually defined that term for us, and that is total war. You talk about unrestricted warfare. Chris, you mentioned 9/11. In Unrestricted Warfare, which is a slim book from 1999 by two Chinese Air Force colonels, they actually talk about bin Laden hitting the United States. That's 2 years before 9/11.
Well, Peter, they're at it again. The FBI investigating Chinese operatives tied to the CCP at the University of Michigan who allegedly smuggled a biological pathogen into the United States. It's a fungus designed to taint America's food supply. Peter, is this part, in your view, of China's unrestricted warfare against the United States?
Yeah, I think it absolutely is. And look, let's add another book to that description, a book published in China in 2012 titled Disintegration Warfare, which is along the same lines as unrestricted warfare. The notion is we are going to figure out, the CCP is going to figure out ways in which we can harm and damage the United States that is short of a kinetic war. In other words, we don't want to actually launch missiles or have aircraft carriers launching aircraft and bombing each other. But we are going to think of ways in which we can disintegrate or fragment American society. And certainly the health system is one way to do that. Fentanyl is some way to do that. I talk in my book, Blood Money, about this problem with the Glock switches. These are small devices that turn a Glock handgun into a machine gun. China was exporting those to criminal gangs in the United States beginning in 2018, leading to a surge in criminal gangs having massive firepower against law enforcement. So I think the assumption we have to operate under is when these sorts of things happen, and Gordon writes about this, I think, very well in his recent book, we have to assume that there is probably official CCP sanction behind it, because the notion that you're going to have senior officials connected to the government or connected to the establishment in China kind of freelancing on this stuff just does not make any sense. So yeah, it is part of a Chinese concerted strategy to undermine us.
Yes, and folks, just keep in mind, your own American government knows all about everything we're talking about. Gordon, Reuters reporting that China militarizing what I call the Woody Islands, because that's the biggest fake island in the chain here. 2 long-range military bombers were spotted here last week. Dictator Xi Jinping promised China wasn't militarizing this chain of artificial islands, that it was illegally occupying. But back in 2015, he promised that. But you and I know, Gordon, that leftists lie. Now President Trump says China has begun cheating on this temporary trade agreement. Gordon, how many more bricks have to fall on America's head before we take concrete actions to defend ourselves against communist China?
I wish I knew the answer to that question, Chris, because clearly the Chinese did cheat on the May 12th agreement. They had promised to remove non-tariff barriers that had been put in place after April 2nd. So they clearly have not complied. You know, and by the way, you know, what Peter just said, these Glock switches, you know, we found some of them coming into Minnesota just after the George Floyd protests. So this is part of a concerted campaign to attack the United States. And it's across the board, whether we're talking about fungus, we're talking about Glock switches, counterfeit currency, fentanyl, you name it. This is part of a plan.
Total warfare. Peter, you explore an aspect in your book why so many American politicians in both parties are just looking the other way as brick after brick falls on Americans' heads. What did you uncover in your